The courtroom felt colder than it should have been. The air smelled like old paper, polished wood, and the quiet tension that settles when everyone is waiting for someone else to break. I stood behind my lawyer at the long wooden table, hands sweating, heartbeat loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. Across from me, my wife sat perfectly still, her expression calm and practiced, like she had rehearsed it in the mirror. Her attorney rested in a thick folder in front of the judge, a folder filled with accusations about me, dangerous, unstable, unfit to be a father, a man who should never be trusted alone with his own child. I tried to breathe steadily, but every word they said felt like a crack forming under my feet. And then the judge looked down at my daughter. She was 7, too small for a room like this, holding a bright pink backpack against her chest like it was armor. The judge asked her politely to step forward. My daughter hesitated for a moment, then unzipped the bag slowly, her small fingers shaking. The courtroom leaned forward, the silence stretching tight. No one knew what she was about to pull out, but whatever it was going to decide everything. I used to believe my marriage was stable, maybe not perfect, but steady enough to last. It was the kind of belief a tired man clings to when he works long hours, comes home late, and tells himself that silence at the dinner table is normal. That distance is temporary. That love can be recovered if you just keep trying. But months before the courtroom, the cracks had already started spreading. My wife grew quieter, colder, and strangely patient in a way that didn't feel like kindness but strategy. She had begun treating our home like a stage, and me like an unwanted character in her script. Every interaction was measured. Every insult was disguised as concern. Every disagreement was twisted into a warning sign about my temper. Even if I hadn't raised my voice. Then came the night she announced she was filing for divorce. She didn't look sad or conflicted. She looked prepared. She told me I was unstable. She said I was too emotional. She said I was a danger to our daughter and that the court would see it too. And the way she said it, with calm certainty, made my stomach twist. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was confidence. The kind someone has when they believe they've already won. Days later, I discovered why. She had spent months gathering things to use against me. Small clips from arguments recorded on her phone. Screenshots of messages taken completely out of context. Notes she had typed about my behavior after deliberately provoking me. It wasn't evidence. It was a performance. A carefully arranged version of our life where she was the fragile victim and I was the threat. Full custody. And she was willing to poison the air we breathed to get it. But what she didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that our daughter had seen everything too. She had watched how her mother spoke to me when no one else was around. She had heard the lies whispered into the phone at night. She had noticed the secret meetings, the new perfume, the sudden need for privacy. And without telling anyone, she had started saving the truth inside that bright pink backpack she carried everywhere, tucked between school worksheets and crayons. She kept pieces of the life her mother pretended didn't exist. She didn't do it out of revenge. She didn't even understand the full weight of it. She just knew something was wrong. And she had held on to the evidence because children see far more than adults ever assume. The closer we got to the final hearing, the clearer it became that my wife had built her case on manipulation. She spoke to me like a stranger. She refused any conversation that wasn't filtered through her lawyer. She told friends I was unstable. She told neighbors I needed help. She crafted a story where I was the villain she needed to escape from. And she walked into that courtroom expecting the judge to simply believe her. She didn't know was about to rewrite everything. The truth remained quiet, waiting in that small pink backpack, ready to change the entire direction of the case. And that truth would begin revealing itself in the most unexpected way. The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the darkest days of my life. Every morning, I woke up with the same sinking pressure in my chest, the kind that makes breathing feel like a chore. My wife had moved out, taking our daughter with her, claiming it was for safety. I didn't argue because any pushback would be twisted into aggression. Instead, I followed every instruction the court gave me: parenting classes, evaluations, home inspections. Anything to prove I was stable enough to see my own child. My friends told me to fight harder, to expose her lies, to defend myself publicly. But I knew her too well. The more noise I made, the more she would point to it as proof of her story. So I stayed quiet, collected documents, and trusted the system to see through the act. But the system was slow, and she was fast. She had already crafted a picture-perfect narrative. She told the guardian ad litem that I was unpredictable. She told the evaluator that I used to yell for no reason. She told her lawyer that I had isolated her emotionally. And every time I tried to respond calmly, she would tilt her head and whisper, "See how sensitive he gets." It was a psychological trap, one she had been building long before I realized she was even capable of it. Meanwhile, I grew terrified of how much influence she had on our daughter. During supervised visits, my little girl clung to me, but spoke carefully, like she was afraid someone was listening. She glanced at the door often. She kept asking if Mommy would be mad she was having fun. She smiled, but it was small and hesitant, like happiness was something she had to hide. One afternoon, during a short visit at the park, she pressed her forehead against my shoulder and whispered, "Daddy, I saved something." The words were soft, but they hit me like thunder. I asked her what she meant, but she shook her head. "Not here, not now." She hugged me tighter, little fingers gripping hard. I didn't understand then. I thought she was just trying to hold on to something normal. I didn't know she had meant it literally. Around that time, I started hearing small rumors. Neighbors told me my wife had been disappearing late at night, leaving our daughter with sitters she barely knew. A coworker mentioned seeing her having dinner with someone who wasn't me. I didn't chase any of it. Not because I didn't care, but because the divorce wasn't about infidelity. It was about custody. It was about stability. It was about the judge's perception of me. Bringing up cheating would make me look desperate or vengeful. I stayed patient. I stayed quiet. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Then came the morning of the hearing. I woke up before dawn, the sky still dark, the world quiet except for the sound of my thoughts racing. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to steady my breathing, repeating in my mind that I had nothing to hide, that the judge would see I was a good father. That truth wins, even when it's slow. When I arrived at the courthouse, she was already there with her lawyer, both of them polished and composed. She didn't look at me at first, but when she finally did, the expression she gave me wasn't fear or sadness. It was satisfaction, like everything had gone exactly the way she planned. She didn't know that her plan had a flaw, a small one, with pigtails and a backpack full of crayons. The judge called us in. The room was quiet. My lawyer whispered to me that we would fight hard but respectfully. I nodded, though my heart was pounding. I kept staring at my daughter, who sat beside a court-appointed advocate. She held her backpack on her lap, hugging it like she was protecting something precious. Then the judge asked to hear from her. My wife tensed beside her lawyer, trying to look calm. My daughter stood up slowly and walked forward. She held the backpack tighter as she approached the witness stand. The judge leaned forward slightly. He asked her if she had anything she wanted to share. She nodded once. Then, without looking at either of us, she unzipped the backpack. The sound of the zipper echoed in the silent room. Inside that small bag was the truth my wife thought she had buried. And my daughter, without knowing the weight of what she carried, was about to place it all in the center of the courtroom. The moment she reached inside, everything we thought we understood about the case began to change. When my daughter reached into her backpack, the courtroom shifted. The judge straightened in his seat. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering above the keys. This wasn't normal behavior for a child placed in the middle of a custody battle. Children usually look confused, scared, or quiet, but my daughter looked focused, determined in a way that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. That was the first angle of this story. Not my innocence, not my wife's lies, but a child's attempt to fix something she didn't understand yet fully felt. She pulled out a small tablet, the one she used to draw on. The case was cracked at the corner from being dropped too many times. She held it tightly with both hands and whispered to the judge that she had something to show him, something she recorded by accident. The judge looked at my wife, then back at the child, and gave a small nod. So she tapped the screen. The second angle was the audio itself, tinny, grainy, but unmistakable. At first, it was my daughter's voice, soft, asking if Mommy was done talking on the phone and if she could have dinner now. My wife's response was sharp, impatient, dripping with annoyance. The judge leaned in. My wife froze. The room was silent except for the recording playing out loud. Then came the part where she didn't know she was being recorded. Her voice lowered, angry and careless, as she ranted to someone about how she would make sure he never sees that child again. She said she would tell the court anything she needed to. She said I was too gentle to fight back and too passive to defend myself. She laughed as she said it. The third angle hit even harder. The man's voice on the call, calm, relaxed, too familiar for someone my wife called a coworker. He told her not to worry. He told her the judge would believe her because women always win custody. He told her to stay focused and keep painting me as unstable. My lawyer looked at me, his face turning grim. He already understood the weight of what was being revealed. The judge understood it too. But the fourth angle, the one that changed everything, wasn't on the recording. It was the way my wife reacted. Her face drained of color. Her breathing turned shallow. She gripped the table until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't shocked because the recording existed. She was shocked because she didn't know my daughter had heard any of it. She didn't know the lies she fed our child were unraveling right there in front of her. That expression, the sudden panic, the loss of control, did more damage to her case than any lawyer could have done. The judge let the audio play until the end. When it finished, the silence felt like a verdict by itself. My daughter looked down at her shoes, almost embarrassed, as if she thought she had done something wrong. She didn't realize she had just given the court the clearest proof of emotional manipulation, of parental alienation, of deliberate cruelty. The fifth angle was the reaction from the guardian ad litem. For weeks, she had been neutral, careful, walking the line between both sides. But when she heard the recording, her posture changed. She turned slowly toward my wife, studying her, evaluating her. She took notes rapidly, her expression tightening with every word she had just heard. She had been looking for signs of instability in me. Instead, she had just heard a mother weaponize her own child. The sixth angle belonged to the truth itself. Truth that doesn't shout. Truth that sits quietly, waiting for the right moment to surface. In that courtroom, truth appeared, not through evidence we collected, not through accusations or arguments, but through a child's simple attempt to show what her little heart had been forced to carry. She didn't understand custody. She didn't understand divorce. But she understood pain. She understood unfairness. And she wanted someone to know. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, steadier. The atmosphere of the room had changed completely. My wife had come prepared with rehearsed stories and manufactured tears. My daughter had come with something real, and real has a way of cutting through everything. The tablet screen dimmed. My daughter placed it gently on the wooden stand, as if it were something fragile. The judge folded his hands and asked her one more question, and her answer would reshape the entire case. The judge leaned forward and asked my daughter a simple question. "Why did you bring this?" She looked at him, then at me, then at her mother. Her feet swung nervously above the ground, and her small hands twisted the edge of her dress. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. She said she brought it because she didn't want anyone to lie about her dad anymore. And that answer, spoken so softly in a courtroom full of adults, created the seventh angle of this story. A child trying to protect the parent who had never once asked her to. My wife's attorney immediately objected, but the judge waved him off. The truth had slipped out, and everyone knew it. You cannot coach that kind of statement. You cannot manufacture that tone or that trembling sincerity. It came from a place of quiet hurt, and children don't hide hurt well. My daughter wasn't trying to win a case. She wasn't trying to expose anyone. She was trying to stop the confusion and stop the guilt that had been placed on her shoulders by adults who should have protected her instead. The eighth angle appeared through the court's evaluator, who examined the emotion behind my daughter's words. Children her age rarely express such clarity unless they have experienced long-term fear or distress. The evaluator wrote rapidly as she observed my daughter's shaking voice and tear-filled eyes. She noted the strain. She noted the hesitation. She noted how my daughter kept glancing at me for reassurance, not because she feared punishment, but because she knew I was the only person who never demanded anything from her. The ninth angle came from my wife's sudden collapse in credibility. Until now, she had presented herself as calm, composed, reasonable. But the moment her daughter spoke against her narrative, her mask cracked. She began whispering aggressively to her lawyer. Her jaw clenched. Her breathing turned sharp. And every expression she made confirmed something the court had suspected but hadn't been able to prove yet. that her story didn't match her behavior, that her allegations were crafted, not lived, that her anger was not fear of harm but fear of losing control. The 10th angle emerged when the judge asked my daughter if she felt safe with both parents. She said she felt safe with me. Then she paused. It was a long pause, the kind that freezes a room. Finally, she said that she didn't like when Mommy yelled about Daddy on the phone. She said it made her stomach hurt. She said she felt scared when Mommy slammed doors. She said she didn't understand why Mommy told her she shouldn't trust me. She said Daddy never said anything bad about Mommy, even when Mommy cried in the bathroom. And with each innocent confession, my wife's face turned more rigid. Every adult in the room knew exactly what was being revealed. Emotional pressure, manipulation, shaping a child's fear to win a legal battle. The 11th angle appeared when the judge allowed my daughter to step down. She walked past me slowly, her eyes red. I didn't reach for her, even though every part of me wanted to. Court rules, boundaries. But when she sat next to the guardian ad litem, she leaned against her shoulder, exhausted. And the guardian placed a hand gently on her back, a silent gesture, acknowledging everything she had just carried into the room. The 12th angle was the reaction from the courtroom itself. Even the spectators, strangers seated in the back row, shifted uncomfortably. You could feel the collective understanding settling over everyone. My wife had tried to present herself as the victim, but the cruelty revealed in the audio and the child's own quiet testimony showed a different reality, one shaped by bitterness and resentment. Every word my daughter said was being recorded permanently. Every admission, every hesitation, every detail of emotional strain. Judges rarely show emotion, but there was a heavy exhale, a moment of reflection. He knew what this meant for the custody decision. He knew which home was stable and which wasn't. He knew who nurtured and who manipulated. He knew what the child had just confirmed. And the 14th angle was the beginning of my wife's unraveling. She finally spoke, breaking the fragile silence. Her voice wasn't calm anymore. It wasn't composed. It wasn't reasonable. She accused my daughter of misunderstanding. She accused the court of bias. She accused me of coaching. But the judge stopped her before she could finish. His tone was firm, colder than before. He reminded her that a child's words, when consistent with recorded evidence, cannot simply be dismissed as confusion. It was the first time she truly looked afraid, and it was the moment the balance of the entire case shifted. The next step wasn't just legal. It was emotional. It was the point where truth began to surface faster than she could bury it. Courtroom was about to hear the piece of the story she feared the most. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced toward the witness stand. My daughter sat there, her legs barely reaching the edge of the seat, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack. She looked terrified, but she kept her eyes steady. The entire courtroom fell silent when the judge spoke and asked her if she wanted to share something. She nodded once, a slow, determined nod that did not belong to a 7-year-old. She reached into her backpack, unzipped it, and pulled out her tablet, a pink case with stickers. The same one she used for her cartoons and homework. Only this time, she held it with the seriousness of someone carrying evidence that could break a world open. My wife shifted in her seat. At first, she smiled, expecting her daughter to run into her arms. But that smile slowly thinned when she saw the tablet. Then my wife's lawyer leaned forward, whispering to her in a rushed voice. She brushed him off. Her eyes locked on the screen as if it were about to betray her. My daughter looked at the judge and spoke in a soft voice. She said she wanted him to hear something because nobody believed her when she tried to tell them. The judge asked what it was. She said it was a recording. She said she made it by accident. She said she was scared. Then she placed the tablet on the microphone stand and pressed play. The courtroom froze. The judge leaned forward. My wife went rigid. Her lawyer's face drained of color, but the recording kept going. My wife's voice dropped to a whisper, the kind people use when they think nobody is nearby. She was talking to a man, not me. She was calling him baby. She was telling him that once the divorce was done, she would move in with him. She said she only needed the custody case to go a certain way so she could get child support and full control. Then she laughed again, a cold laugh, a laugh that spread through the speakers like poison. I watched her. She could not blink. She could not swallow. Her face was losing its color moment by moment. The lies she had prepared for months had no defense against her own voice echoing across the courtroom. The judge raised a hand for the bailiff to pause the audio, but another sound came through before they could stop it. My daughter's small voice. She was crying on the recording, crying quietly, crying because she heard everything that night while hiding behind the hallway wall, crying because she did not understand why her mother hated me so much. The judge's hand froze midair. He let the recording finish, every last second of it, and when the final bit of audio faded, the room stayed silent, a kind of silence that felt like judgment itself. My daughter lowered her eyes. The judge breathed out slowly, stunned. My wife finally broke, whispering something no one could understand. Her lawyer wiped his forehead. Nothing they planned mattered anymore. The truth was out, and the turning point had arrived. The judge cleared his throat slowly, and what he said next would change everything that came after. The judge leaned back in his chair and let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind a man releases only when he is trying to balance anger with duty. His eyes moved from the tablet to my daughter, then to my wife, whose hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. The courtroom clerk looked stunned. The bailiff stood a little straighter, waiting for an order. Everyone knew what they had just heard. Everyone understood what it meant. The judge finally spoke, and his voice was different than before. It carried a weight that pressed down on the entire room. He said that the recording was clear and credible. He said, "A child does not accidentally produce something like that unless something deeply wrong is happening behind closed doors." He said he needed to ask my wife a question directly. When he asked her if the voice in the recording was hers, she did not answer. She stared at the floor. Then he repeated the question, and still she said nothing. Her silence was enough. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down immediately. He said my wife had been caught manipulating the court. He said she had attempted to twist the system to destroy the bond between a father and his daughter for personal gain. He said the recording showed a pattern of emotional harm, dishonesty, and premeditated deception. My wife finally spoke, but her voice cracked. She tried to say it was taken out of context. She tried to say she was stressed. She tried to say she did not mean any of it, but the judge raised his hand. He told her to stop. He told her, "The court sees intentions, not excuses," and her intentions had become undeniable. My daughter began crying softly, and the judge called for a short recess to give her a moment. When the court reconvened, the entire energy in the room had shifted. The judge asked me to approach the bench. He looked at me with a softness that had not been there before, as if seeing a father who had been fighting quietly for far too long. He said that in all his years on the bench, he rarely saw such a clear example of a child being forced into emotional chaos by a parent's selfish choices. He turned back to my wife. This time his tone was cold. He told her that custody decisions are based on what is best for the child, not what benefits one parent, not what makes one parent feel powerful, not what fits someone's personal agenda. The decision came down like a hammer. The judge awarded me temporary full custody, effective immediately. He suspended her visitation rights until a psychological evaluation could take place. Then he ordered an investigation into her conduct because the recording suggested intentional manipulation. It was no longer a simple divorce case. It had become something bigger. When the words were spoken, my wife collapsed into her chair as if her entire world had dropped out from under her. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. People in the courtroom whispered. The bailiff stepped closer to her just in case she tried to bolt. But I did not look at her. I looked at my daughter. She was wiping her eyes, trying to be brave. I walked over, knelt beside her, and she threw her arms around me. Her small body felt fragile, but in that moment she held more truth than any adult in that room. The judge watched us quietly before turning the page on his notes and speaking again. He said, "The court would not allow a child to be used as a weapon." He said this case was no longer about accusations. It was about proof, and the proof had spoken for itself. My wife looked at me across the room, tears rolling down her face. She mouthed the words, "Please, and wait and listen," but it was too late. Everything she thought she controlled had slipped away. The moment our daughter pressed play, when the judge dismissed the court, people stayed in their seats, unsure what they had just witnessed. It felt like the end of a battle no one knew was happening. I took my daughter's hand and walked toward the exit, feeling something I had not felt in months, relief and something deeper, justice. But the real consequences of what happened in court were only just beginning. When we walked out of the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter than it had when we entered. Not because anything around us had changed, but because a weight that had been crushing my chest for months was suddenly gone. My daughter held my hand tightly, as if afraid that someone might try to pull her away again. I squeezed her hand back and told her everything was okay now, and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. My wife came out a few minutes later, escorted by her lawyer. She looked disoriented, trying to process how everything had collapsed so quickly. Her attorney whispered to her urgently, gesturing toward the exit, but she kept looking at us, her eyes swollen and frantic. She opened her mouth as if to call my daughter's name, but when she saw the bailiff watching her, she lowered her head and walked the other way. The distance between us finally made sense. It was a distance she had created, not me. Outside, the air felt colder. I could see my breath rising as I helped my daughter into the car. She was still holding the tablet, the same one that had changed both our lives. She looked down at it and said quietly that she didn't mean to get anyone in trouble. I told her she didn't do anything wrong. She told the truth. That was enough. That was everything. The days that followed moved in strange, slow waves. My phone rang constantly. Some calls were from the court, some from social services, some from people who had heard bits of the story and wanted the full version. I ignored most of them. I spent my days helping my daughter settle into something close to a normal routine again. Breakfast at our own pace, homework without tension, bedtime without whispered arguments slipping through the walls. She slept better almost immediately. The absence of fear changes a child faster than anything else. Her laughter returned, fragile at first, then fuller, as if rediscovering its strength. She began drawing again, filling pages with bright colors instead of dark, empty spaces. My wife, on the other hand, spiraled. Her lawyer sent emails full of panic. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted to correct misunderstandings. He wanted to soften the damage. But the judge had already ordered a full evaluation, and the investigators moved quickly. They questioned teachers, neighbors, family members, anyone who had seen her behavior change over the past months. They reviewed the recording multiple times. They compared her statements with the messages found on her phone, and each discovery made the situation sure worse for her. The custody ruling that had initially been temporary was showing signs of becoming permanent. She tried contacting me directly, sending long messages late at night. Some were angry. Some were pleading. Some were apologies written in sentences that fell apart halfway through. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word reminded me of the months she had spent destroying my name while smiling to my face. Every paragraph felt like another layer of manipulation. Silence became my answer. One evening, about 2 weeks after the hearing, her mother called me. Her voice was shaking. She said my wife had moved back into her childhood room. She said she barely ate. She said she cried for hours. She said the man she had been speaking to on the recordings had disappeared the moment the news became public. He didn't return her calls. He didn't defend her. He didn't even acknowledge her. The collapse was complete, but none of this brought me joy. It didn't make me feel victorious. It just made me feel tired. Because what happened in court wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about protecting my daughter from becoming a tool in someone else's bitterness. Eventually, the court scheduled a final review hearing. The outcome would determine whether the temporary custody would be made permanent. I arrived early that morning, holding my daughter's hand as we walked into the same building where everything had changed weeks before. This time, the tension was gone. There was no fear, only clarity. My wife arrived late, sitting quietly across the room. She looked smaller somehow, like someone still searching for the pieces of a life that had been shattered. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at our daughter. She just stared at the floor, waiting for the judge to speak. And when he did, everything became final. The judge's voice was steady as he read the final ruling. He said, the evidence was clear. He said the court had a responsibility to protect the emotional and psychological well-being of a child. He said the pattern of manipulation was undeniable. Then he looked directly at my wife, the woman who had once convinced an entire courtroom that she was the stable parent, and he told her that custody would not be returned to her. Not now, not for a long time. Not until she completed therapy, parental evaluations, and demonstrated real change. The words settled over the room like a heavy winter blanket. My wife's hands shook as she covered her mouth. Her lawyer lowered his head, defeated. My daughter squeezed my arm and leaned against me, relieved in a way children never know how to describe. The judge continued, explaining that I would have full custody, along with the authority to make major decisions about schooling, healthcare, and home routines. He said supervised visitation would be arranged, but only after a therapist approved it. He emphasized that this case was unusual for one reason. The truth had come not from adults, but from a child who simply wanted someone to listen. When the judge stood and left the bench, the courtroom slowly emptied. My daughter wrapped her arms around my waist, holding on tightly. I stayed still for a moment, feeling her heart beat against me. It was steady and calm, the way a child's heartbeat should be. My wife remained seated. She stared at the wooden table in front of her, as if she hoped it would speak for her, apologize for her, undo everything. She finally looked up, her eyes red and exhausted. There was no anger left, only regret. She whispered my name, barely audible, but I didn't respond. I didn't need a final scene or a final explanation. The truth had already been spoken, and it had spoken loudly. Outside, the sky was gray, but the air felt lighter. My daughter slid her hand into mine. She asked if things would stay peaceful now. I told her yes. She nodded, as if confirming it for herself, then asked if we could go get pancakes to celebrate. Something simple, something normal. I smiled and told her, of course. Over the next few weeks, life rearranged itself. Not perfectly, not instantly, but gently. I found a routine that allowed my daughter to feel safe again. Her teacher told me she had become more confident. Her drawings returned to bright colors. Her laughter came freely. There were no more whispered conversations through doors. No more pretending. No more fear. As for my wife, I received updates through the court. She was attending therapy, slowly working through the damage she had caused. She had moved out of her mother's home and into a small apartment. Her life had shrunk, not out of punishment, but consequence. She had built her world on a version of reality that could no longer survive sunlight. I didn't hate her. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I simply hoped she would one day understand what she almost destroyed. Not my reputation, not my stability, but her own daughter's sense of trust. Months passed, and the final piece of the aftermath settled into place. I received a letter from the court confirming that no further hearings were necessary for the foreseeable future. Custody was secure. The visitation process would move slowly at my daughter's pace. There would be no surprises, no new accusations, no sudden reversals. For the first time in years, the future felt steady. One evening, I stood in my daughter's doorway as she slept. Her backpack hung on the back of her chair, the same backpack she had carried into the courtroom, the same one she had opened with trembling hands to reveal the truth no one expected. It looked so ordinary now, quiet, still, but I knew what it represented: courage, honesty, a child's instinct to protect what was good. I realized something then. This entire ordeal had not been a story about divorce or betrayal or legal battles. It had been a story about a little girl who refused to let lies become her reality. A little girl who trusted that truth, even when whispered through tears, could change everything. And she was right. The worst chapter of our lives had closed. A new one had begun. One built not on fear, but on stability, patience, and the simple joy of waking up each day knowing we were finally safe. When all of this was finally behind us, I found myself returning to a single thought. Not the courtroom moments, not the arguments, not the months of confusion. It was the moment my daughter reached into her small backpack and pulled out the truth she had been carrying alone. A truth heavier than any child should hold. That tiny act changed everything. I realized that children often see what adults refuse to do. They hear what we think is hidden. They carry burdens we never meant to give them, and yet they still find ways to tell the truth, even if their voices shake while doing it. This experience taught me that strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like a child tugging at a judge's sleeve. Sometimes it looks like speaking when silence would be easier. Sometimes it looks like trusting that someone will finally listen. I didn't walk away from this with victory in mind. I walked away with clarity. I understood that protecting a child is not about winning custody. It's about creating a world where they no longer have to hide their fears in backpacks or whisper their worries into pillows. People often say the truth hurts, but sometimes the truth heals. It rebuilds, it restores. It allows a broken home to become a peaceful one. In the end, that is what mattered most. My daughter no longer carries fear on her shoulders. She carries her favorite books, her glitter pens, and a small stuffed bear she insists is lucky. Her backpack is light again, and so are we.